Hey y'all, this is lecture 4, unit 4. This is the last lecture, so we'll get to it. So this is kind of the politics of the time of the market revolution. We kind of ended last time with the War of 1812. I think a good context for this DBQ would be the War of 1812. Jackson was the hero, the Battle of New Orleans. The Federalists are going to die out. This is known as the era of good feelings. We also have economic expansion due to the market revolution. And because of that, you kind of have what people call increased sectionalism. You have the North, the South, and the West. You have our geographic expansion, Louisiana Purchase, and Adams Onis for kind of like expanding west. So I think any of these things would be a good context because it'll be before the age of Jackson, which is what we're kind of getting into. Some of these things about Jacksonian democracy, what we're basically going to be going over is universal white male suffrage, territorial expansion, and Indian removal. The fact that Jackson opposed internal improvements, including the Maysville Road, the spoils system, nullification, and opposing the national bank. So this is what makes Jacksonian Democrats. So the first thing we're going to look at is political participation. That is kind of exemplified in Doc A. So this is a time of expanding political participation. I know it doesn't sound like a lot, but having universal white male suffrage is an expansion. Before, only a small number of elites could vote, property-owning elites, and now states are moving so that every white male can vote. I think this is also a good significant fact to talk about when we look at the market revolution and gender roles, because now who can vote is based on your gender and your sex. So this is probably one of the pivotal facts to remember about this time is universal white male suffrage. The other thing is that more people are voting for more offices on the local level. There's an increase in popular campaigning processes, and rather than just having like people make a decision in the back of a room, they are ending this sort of caucus system. So here we have Doc A, and just to kind of take a look at the reading, it is important. So the first time Jackson is going to lose is here. This is in 1824. And I think it is significant. When he wins is in 1828. And so what this is showing is that the electors, how are they selected? So P is for popular, and so this is when he won. This is when he lost, right, as far as Jackson. All right. So if you notice, between the two elections, you went from legislators to popular vote, legislators to popular vote, legislators to popular vote. All right. Now, who are the states that still have legislators? Are like Delaware and South Carolina, southern states, Louisiana, these states. They are one of the last states to decide to go to the popular vote. Some folks kind of look at things like slavery. This is one of the reasons. But by 1828, most folks have the popular vote to, select the president. It is no longer the state legislature. So in the original Constitution, your state legislature would go into a room and decide who they were going to vote for president. Now it is people voting for the president. So who is going to benefit if the people are voting for president is Jackson, because he considers himself a man of the people. If you have a bunch of politicians deciding who is going to become president, they will probably pick anyone but Jackson because he really went against their system. So this 1824, by 1828, only two here have the legislature. It is now a popular vote. So it's one of the things to think about as we looked at that. So this isn't even about universal white male suffrage. This is about how people are choosing the president. So you could use universal white male suffrage as an outside fact. This is actually talking about popular vote. But when we do talk about popular vote, who are the people who are voting by the people? It is white males. That is who is voting. So I think that is something to bring in as an outside fact when we're interpreting that graph. So after the War of 1812, essentially the Federalist Party goes away. We are left with only the Democratic Republican Party. Under the time of Monroe, this is called the era of good feelings. The economy is doing well. There is only one political party. This is the era of good feelings. And this era of good feelings starts to break down along what we would call sectional lines. We're going to have Jackson, who's from the West, Henry Clay, who's also from the West, but he's more from Ohio. Anyway, Adams and Crawford, who is from the South. And so you can kind of see, again, in New England, they're manufacturing. In the West, they are small-time farmers. And in the South, they are planters or plantations. So in the Missouri Compromise, we actually draw a line, starting to divide between slave and free states. And in the election of 24, we start to see this sectionalism is dividing the nation. So you have these people from different regions, and yeah. So we have, in this election, it is very complicated. Electoral vote's always complicated, but here it is specifically. So Jackson won 43% of the vote and only 38% of the electoral vote. So in his mind, he won. But what happens is Adams is this kind of pinky color. Adams joins with Clay. And when they add up their electoral votes, they beat Jackson, right? This is what Jackson is going to call the corrupt bargain. It is when we add Adams plus Clay beats Jackson, right? Jackson hates this, and basically he is going to organize his entire life over the next 4 years to defeat Clay and Adams in the next election. So he loses. Jackson loses in 1824, and he sort of reorganizes. And when he loses, they're going to start what's called Clay's American System. Clay's American System looks a lot like Hamilton's system, where we are going to have protective tariffs for domestic manufacturing, a national bank, and internal improvements. Internal improvements are like roads. So like in 1811, we are going to get the national road. This is all kind of context for it, but in 1811, there's going to be a national road. These roads, right, they are basically what we would call today like infrastructure, right? If we're building bridges and harbors and roads, this is what today we call infrastructure. At that time, they called internal improvements. So internal improvements are just infrastructure. So essentially, we're going to have tariffs, which will help promote manufacturing. We're going to have a national bank to help fund things. And we're going to have lots of infrastructure spending to create a national system of trade. So that is the American system. And essentially what's going to happen is the Whigs here are going to support the American system, right? And these guys are usually the middle class. These guys are also the ones who are usually pro-temperance. And then we're going to get the Democrats here, who are Jackson. They are the Western farmers. They do not like tariffs. They do not like the national bank. And they do not like, both of them have no stance on slavery because they're trying to get the South and limited government. So this is kind of like the old Dems, like if we go back to Jefferson, which could also be a context, and this is like the old Federalists, but with a little bit of reform added on. So the Whigs look a lot like the Federalists. It's like the Federalists die out for a little bit, and then they reemerge as the Whigs, and the Jacksonian Democrats are like the old Democratic Republicans. So these are kind of the two systems there. And the election of 1828 is different than the election of 1824. And one, we looked at the graph before, more states are voting on the popular vote. But also Jackson just, and Adams, it is a very bitter campaign. There's a lot of personal attacks, including Rachel Jackson. Technically, I would never say this to Jackson. We'll go over that in a minute. But Rachel Jackson may have married Jackson when she wasn't divorced from her first husband. But Jackson is really campaigning as the common man, right? He's a man of the people. We should do this. Old Hickory, he's a hero. And I think, and then, Adams, on the other hand, is painting Jackson. Jackson is crazy. He murdered people, both of which are true. But Jackson is really benefiting in the fact that he was not born an elite. If we go through our presidents, Washington, elite Virginia slaveholder; Jefferson, elite Virginia slaveholder; Madison, elite Virginia slaveholder; Monroe, elite Virginia slaveholder. Only John Adams and his son, John Q. Adams, which he's fighting against, were not Virginia slaveholders. This is a guy who was like, orphaned in the Revolutionary War. He moves out west to like Tennessee and Kentucky. He is a hero. He does become a slaveholder, but he's kind of like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps sort of slaveholder. That's going to come out wrong. But anyway, he wasn't from the beginning an elite planter. He was involved in like 5 to 100 duels. It depends on who you talk to. I like the term of 100 duels. He got in a lot of duels. He killed a man in a duel, and most of these duels were over people insulting his wife. He served in Native American wars as well. He actually adopted a Native American son as well. Anyway, he's a very complicated man. But you would not look at Jackson and be like, this is a man who is elite or who is part of the establishment. He was seen as this like anti-establishment person who was coming in as like a Westerner, a war hero, right? And people identified with him as like this common man. In the election of 1828, he is going to win hands down. You see more influence of these western states, including Missouri. New England is just like outnumbered, and Jackson is going to become president in 1828. This is a painting from 1970. What I like about it is they show Jackson very sad and getting like taken over here, right? This is in the White House in Jackson's inauguration in his rowdy party. There is a document that is from a socialite. A socialite is one of these elite people. She is looking at his inauguration and she's just like, there goes the neighborhood, right? Look at all this rabble coming in to, celebrate Jackson. Jackson was actually really sad because he had just lost his wife. He totally blamed the campaign for it. He just wanted to come home and sleep, but there was a huge raging party going on in the White House. And yeah, so I guess the story goes that the only way they got the party to stop is they kind of rolled the whiskey barrels out of the White House, and then like everybody ran out of the house to like get the whiskey, and then they shut the doors behind them. So anyway, you could take a look at Doc C. A socialite is an elite person. They are someone who has been a part of Washington society, and they are looking out and they are like, oh good Lord, this is what we were afraid was going to happen, right? So, a lot of times people call Jackson the first modern president because he's using the power of the presidency to do what he thinks needs to get done. If you look at Donald Trump, what he put in his White House directly, right, in the Oval Office is a portrait of Jackson. That portrait of Jackson was not there when we had Obama in the office. Jackson feels like he is the common man. He felt like he should use his power to get things done for those who voted for him. He was like, screw the elites. They hate me anyway. I need to do something to check the power of these elites. I could see why Trump identifies with Jackson because they do have a lot of parallels. So, one of the things is that would kind of sound familiar is this idea of a kitchen cabinet. When Jackson comes into to Washington, he doesn't feel like he's welcome. He feels like people hate him. It's surrounded by Clay and all these other political elites. And so who he puts in to the cabinet are his political friends instead of official one. So Jackson is the type of guy who would meet with his friends instead of experts, right? And these are the people he's going to listen to. Also, in the spoil system, if you helped Jackson get into office, he is going to put you in charge of like other things. So you want to be in charge of the mail service? Here you go. You donated to me. You get a position. One of the most prized positions is always going to be like being in charge of tariffs, because you could always skim off the top and these other things. But essentially, Jackson is going to put his friends, his political allies in office, and into his point is that how would I get anything done when I'm surrounded by enemies? So internal improvements, again, is like this transportation revolution. States and federal governments are investing in internal improvements. The one big thing we looked at with states are like canals, right? Like we looked at the Erie Canal, which is right here. So before this, we talked about the National Road. This is the National Road right here. And so most of these kind of internal improvements are meant to connect the West to the East. And the big people who are going to benefit from this are here, right? Missouri, even Tennessee, right? The Cumberland Road, I believe, was a part of like Kentucky, or no, not Cumberland Road, the Maysville Road was supposed to kind of go mostly through Kentucky, where Clay was from. Anyway, in the Maysville Road bill, this is an outside fact. It's going to come to Jackson. He hates Clay. Clay is from Kentucky, and Clay is the one who wants to do this. He wants to connect his state with other places, and Jackson is going to veto this because he finds it unconstitutional. He doesn't think that, like, you know, Virginia and South Carolina should pay for a road that just basically goes through Kentucky. Although this may have helped Western farmers, it is vetoed because he thinks it is unconstitutional. Other outside fact apart from that is we've talked a lot about slavery that was going on. You know, politically what's happening with slavery at this time is people are avoiding the issue. The major thing is there's a gag rule that no one can speak of slavery or abolitionism in Congress. Jackson, there is a riot when anti-slavery bills are sent to the South, essentially to try to promote abolitionism in the South. When people see this, they think that these abolitionists are trying to start a slave rebellion. If you look at this painting or picture, I don't know what it would be. Anyway, in the corner, you have like $2,000 reward for Tappan. Tappan is a famous abolitionist. And so these people break into the post office and burn the mail that was coming from these abolitionists. Now, that is technically against the law. But is Jackson going to go down there and, like, you know, stop these people? No. What he's going to do is prohibit abolitionists from sending things to the South. So while slavery is expanding, you know, also you have to remember he is a slave owner. He is not doing anything to stop slavery. Probably the biggest thing he does that people remember him for, apart from Indian removal, is the national bank controversy. And this really has a lot to do with the election of 1832, which is here, right? So the election of 1832. Nicholas Biddle and the Whigs, along with Clay, Daniel Webster, these are going to be your Whigs. They try to bring up a bill to renew the bank before the election of 1832. And so I think what they're trying to do is make sure that the bank is going to get passed and make sure the bank is on the ballot for 1832. On top of that, Nicholas Biddle is going to give money. Imagine, right, this guy's going to give money to Clay, right? And so Nicholas Biddle and the Bank of the United States are giving money to stop Jackson. So this becomes a major issue of the election of 1832. Jackson wants to kill the bank. Nicholas Biddle is giving money to those who are opposing Jackson. And yeah. So what Jackson wants to do is put this stuff into state banks. So how does it go down? Well, sorry. I think I messed up these slides. It comes out, this is a painting where Nicholas Biddle is like the devil. Often he is. Right here is the devil, Nicholas Biddle, running away as like Jackson is like, yeah, right? Usually they'll also show the bank as this like many-headed beast, and then they'll make like Jackson like have a sword, like, I'm fighting this many-headed beast, right? People really saw this bank war as like the elite versus Jackson. You know, Jackson is fighting the good fight. And so what he does is he is going to veto the bill when it comes up to him. And you guys can read the bank veto, which is one of the documents. Why did he do it? But he pits the elites against the money interest. The planters and the farmers and the mechanic against the moneyed interest. He sees the banks as this elite, and he also sees it as unconstitutional, right? And he is going to fight it. Now, when he vetoes the bank so in 1832 he like vetoes the bill that would recharter the bank, But the bank is going to be around until 1836. That was only like the rechartering of the bank. So he wants to do things to try to end the bank for real, like even before it dies out. And so what he does is he starts to take money out of the national bank because he doesn't want it used against him. He puts it into what are pet banks or like state banks. He's also going to contract the money supply. He hates paper money, which is always weird because he's on the $20 bill. He hates paper money. He makes people use hard money, or it's called specie circular. He deprived money to the bank. He kills a lot of loans. And you're going to have a lot of credit contraction during this time. And Jackson is going to pocket veto there's another thing called specie circular. He's also going to veto that. So essentially, not only is he vetoing the bank, but he's also starving the bank. And that is like his fight, right? That is his big, right, like fight against the bank. So in the election of 1832, he wins hands down, and he kills the bank like dead. Another issue that comes up is the Tariff of Abominations. In this, Calhoun, who is his vice president, stands up and says South Carolina does not have to follow a tariff, that they call it the Tariff of Abomination, because it is unconstitutional. And so Jackson has a history of standing up against things he thinks is unconstitutional, but he does not stand up when the states say something is unconstitutional because he thinks that threatens the supremacy of the federal government. So when Calhoun stands up and says, I think this law is unconstitutional, I'm not going to pay my tariff, I'm not going to pay my taxes, Jackson is like, oh yes, you are. He is going to pass the Force Act, which kind of basically makes the South pay. This could have come to like a skirmish. There could have been a more of an issue, but they're going to do a negotiated tariff that kind of works things out. So we end the bank, right? He vetoes the bank, and then we also have Indian removal. Indian removal, I think, also has to do with the common man, because why is he removing the Indians? Because the common white man wants that land. And so he wants to remove them west into these Indian jurisdictions. I think one thing to remember is that these Cherokees were not living in teepees. These Cherokees are not, I don't know. These Cherokees, I'll show you the map, and then, so imagine that this is the kind of Cherokee Nation here, deep in the south, right? This is the Cherokee Nation. Before they were basically a dependent nation. They were just considered their own territory, like independent, right? And so this is the Cherokee Nation. They are in Georgia. And what are you going to do in Georgia? You are going to have plantations. What did the Cherokee have? Plantations. So it's like white folks want to get into this land, right? I want in. And we're not talking like these people were, not even just, it was like they had schools, they had libraries, they had mills, they had everything. So, people are just like going to literally move in to, take over this land, take over developed land, take over plantation. This is Chief Van's house. When he gets removed, not only does he get moved west, he also takes his slaves with him. So to say they are assimilated into the Southern way of life is very assimilated. They had their own constitution, they had their own laws, they had schools, they had plantations, right? And they are being forced to remove themselves at gunpoint. Now, they are going to take this all the way to the Supreme Court. And in the Supreme Court actually sides with the Cherokee. Again, this is Chief Justice Marshall, right? And he's basically says you can't just take away this Native American land in Worcester v. Georgia. Jackson reportedly says, Marshall has made his decision, now let him enforce it. Meaning, I don't care if you say I can't do this, I am going to do it anyway. So the Indian Removal Act is passed. The Cherokees were trying to protest it. I think even looking at, this is from the Cherokee point of view for Doc F, even looking at this, it shows like we are agriculturalists. We are, right, we are your neighbors, right? Anyway, they're Christian. All of these things, they are completely assimilated. They were under the assumption if they had assimilated to the Southern way of life, they would be left alone, and this is not the case. So they will be removed, and I think you guys watched that video, right? So I guess in an overall thing to think about is Jackson uses his power of the presidency to do what he wants, and one of the things he uses a lot is the veto. We looked at several vetoes. One was the bank veto, one was the Maysville road veto. There are several other vetoes, including getting rid of keeping specie circular. But I think to put it into perspective, Jackson is really the first modern president to use the veto in that way. Before Jackson, I think there was only a total of 8 vetoes, and he is going to veto 12 bills, which isn't a lot today, but was at that time. And so if we look at this cartoon, which is another document, we have him standing on a constitution down here, right? He's also standing on internal improvements. In his thing, this is a veto, right? He's stepping on internal improvements. And this is the Constitution, right? So essentially, he's stepping on the Constitution. He's stepping on internal improvements. He's using this veto as a power, right? And so this would be a Whig perspective, people who are critical of it. The last thing, after Jackson leaves office, there is a Panic of 1837, which is essentially a depression. So if we put it in perspective, before Jackson and during Jackson, there was like a booming economy. This is the market revolution. We have Western expansion, lucrative cotton exports, internal improvements, land sales. So all these Western lands are being sold. We have a bank that's like loaning out loans. We have lots of silver. We have paper money. When Jackson comes in, he's going to limit the credit, right? He's limiting the money supply with hard currency. He's killing the national bank. He's killing a lot of these internal improvements. And we are going to get an economic panic. This is the last document. It is extraordinarily confusing, but essentially it's a story of Balaam who I don't know. Anyway, the donkey is the only one who sees this angel, I don't know, who is blocking his path, and the donkey is like, hey, we shouldn't go forward. And then Balaam starts to like beat the donkey for his actions, and then finally it's revealed. So it's like Jackson is not like heeding the warnings. Martin Van Buren, who is his successor, is like following behind him. And essentially the angel is kind of trying to warn about all the problems with their monetary policy. So this is essentially a cartoon that is saying that, you know, Jackson and Martin Van Buren are responsible for the Panic of 1837. And in this panic, farmers are really hurt because agricultural prices are going to fall. People who are particularly hurt are going to be cotton planters who like over speculated. If I imagine that cotton was always going to go up and I'm investing and investing and investing, you know, it's kind of like a bubble. There are a lot of bank failures. You know, out of 850 banks in the U.S., 343 closed. State banks are never going to really recover. They defaulted on foreign loans, which also hurts the merchants. The publishing industry is going to be hurt. This is like a serious depression. So hopefully that helps with your debate. I will see you guys later.